candle flickered weakly against the heavy shadows that clung to the walls of the Hartwell estate. In the dim light, a trembling hand scrawled the final words of a letter-word soaked in despair, fear, and a haunting certainty that something far darker than mere madness was at work. If you find this, know that I am lost. The house is no longer a refuge, but a prison of shadows. I hear them whispering voices that no one else can hear. 5 wives before me have fallen into this abyss, and now I too am slipping beyond. The edge, what curse haunts the Hartwell name? What unseen force drags us all into darkness? I beg you, do not come here. Do not try to save me, for I fear there is no salvation. This letter, discovered in the attic years later, is the last testament of Eleanor Hartwell, the 5th wife to succumb to the family's grim legacy. Her words echo through time, a chilling reminder that the Hartwell estate is more than just a grand Victorian mansion. It is a tomb of secrets, madness, and tragedy. 5 wives, 5 tragic fates, each one spiraling into insanity under circumstances so eerie, so inexplicable, that even the most rational minds struggled to grasp the truth. Was it hereditary madness, the crushing weight of Victorian expectations, or something far more sinister, an ancient curse, a malevolent force lurking in the shadows of the family's history? Tonight, we begin to unravel the threads of this dark tapestry. What binds the Hartwell wives in their shared descent? What horrors lie hidden behind the estate's imposing walls? Stay with us as we delve into a story where sanity and madness blur, and where every revelation only deepens the mystery. Because some secrets refuse to stay buried and some curses refuse to die. The year was 1873, and Victorian England stood at the height of its grandeur, a world of strict social codes, towering industrial progress, and an unyielding obsession with propriety. Beneath the polished veneer of top hats and corsets, however, lay a society riddled with contradictions, a place where the brightest minds coexisted uneasily with superstition, where the pursuit of progress often masked a darker, more repressive reality. It was in this world that the Hartwell family estate rose like a monolith, a sprawling Gothic mansion perched on the edge of the English countryside, its stone walls weathered by time and secrets. The estate itself was a testament to Victorian ambition and taste. Hall, narrow windows framed by intricate stone tracery, gargoyles perched like silent sentinels along the roofline, and ivy that crept like veins across the facade. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and fading grandeur. Heavy velvet drapes hung in the drawing rooms, muffling the sounds of the outside world, while portraits of stern-faced ancestors glared down from their gilded frames, as if guarding the family's legacy with cold, unblinking eyes. To the casual observer, the Hartwells were the embodiment of respectability. The patriarch, a man of considerable wealth and influence, moved through London's social circles with ease, his family name whispered with admiration and envy. Yet beneath this polished surface, the estate harbored a darkness few dared to acknowledge. Mental illness, in Victorian England, was a subject shrouded in fear and misunderstanding. The asylums were grim places, often more prisons than sanctuaries, and the stigma attached to madness was so severe that families went to great lengths to conceal any hint of it. Within the walls of the Hartwell estate, this stigma was a suffocating presence. The 5 wives who had come and gone were never spoken of openly, their fates whispered only in hushed tones by servants and neighbors. To the outside world, they were simply unwell, fragile women overcome by the pressures of their station. But the truth was far more complex and far more disturbing. Victorian society demanded that women embody purity, obedience, and grace. Yet the very constraints imposed upon them often became the chains that bound their minds. The Hartwell wives, each brought into the family with hopes of securing its future, found themselves trapped in a gilded cage. Their days were regimented by social expectations, their voices silenced by the weight of patriarchal authority. In such an environment, the line between genuine mental illness and the psychological toll of oppression blurred dangerously. Medical understanding of mental health was rudimentary at best. Conditions like hysteria, melancholia, and nervous disorders were catch-all diagnoses, often used to dismiss or control women who defied societal norms or simply suffered in silence. Treatments ranged from the benign to the brutal rest. Cures, isolation, and in some cases, confinement in asylums where the true horrors of Victorian psychiatry awaited. Against this backdrop, the Hartwell estate became a crucible of despair. The imposing Gothic architecture, with its labyrinthine corridors and shadowed corners, seemed to mirror the fractured minds of the women who lived within. The estate was both a sanctuary and a prison, a place where appearances were meticulously maintained even as the foundations of sanity crumbled beneath. This contrast between the outward respectability of the Hartwell family and the hidden rot festering within the stage for a story that is as much about the dark undercurrents of Victorian society as it is about the tragic fate of 5 women. It is a tale where the grandeur of an era masks the fragility of the human mind, and where the ghosts of the past refuse to be silenced. As we step deeper into the shadows of the Hartwell estate, we begin to see how the rigid structures of Victorian life, combined with ignorance and fear, created a perfect storm, one that would claim the minds and souls of 5 wives, leaving behind a legacy of madness and mystery that still haunts the halls today. The man at the center of the Hartwell family's dark saga was Edward Hartwell, the estate's patriarch, figure as enigmatic as the mansion he ruled. To the outside world, Edward was the very image of Victorian respectability, tall, impeccably dressed, with a sharp jawline and piercing eyes that seemed to command attention without effort. His presence in London's drawing rooms was magnetic, his voice calm and measured, his manners polished to perfection. He was a man who knew how to wield influence, both socially and economically, and he did so with an unyielding confidence that few dared to challenge. Born into privilege, Edward inherited the Hartwell estate at a young age after the sudden death of his father, a loss that seemed to harden him rather than soften. His upbringing was steeped in the rigid values of the Victorian upper-class discipline, control, and an unshakable belief in the family's superiority. Yet beneath this polished exterior lay a man driven by darker impulses, a need for absolute control, a suspicion of weakness, and a chilling detachment from the suffering of those closest to him. Edward's relationships with his 5 wives were complex and fraught with tension. Each marriage beginning with the promise of companionship and stability, but ending in tragedy. The first wife, Clara, was a gentlewoman from a respectable family, known for her kindness and quiet strength. At first, Edward appeared devoted, but as time passed, his controlling nature emerged. He isolated her from friends and family, dictating every aspect of her life. When Clara's health began to fail, Edward's concern seemed more about appearances than compassion. Her eventual breakdown was met with cold pragmatism, a hushed removal from the estate, and a swift replacement. The second wife, Margaret, was younger and more spirited, a stark contrast to Clara's subdued demeanor. Edward's charm was on full display during their courtship, but behind closed doors, his temper was volatile. Margaret's attempts to assert herself were met with subtle punishments, dismissive glances, whispered accusations, and a tightening grip on her freedom. When she vanished mysteriously one winter night, rumors swirled, but Edward's stoic public face never wavered. The truth of her disappearance remains one of the estate's darkest secrets. With each subsequent marriage, Edward's pattern grew clearer. The third wife, Beatrice, was a fragile woman whose delicate constitution made her an easy target for his relentless demands. The fourth, Eleanor, was intelligent and defiant, qualities that seemed to provoke Edward's ire rather than admiration. His treatment of Eleanor was marked by a cold cruelty that many servants whispered about but dared not confront. Her descent into madness was swift and brutal, culminating in the desperate letter that would later be discovered. Despite the mounting tragedies, Edward maintained an unshakable public image. To society, he was a grieving husband, a pillar of strength who bore his losses with stoic dignity. But behind the Esterhazy doors, his control was absolute and merciless. Servants spoke in hushed tones of his late-night rages, his icy silences, and the way he seemed to watch the women as if waiting for them to break. Some speculated that his obsession with order and perfection was a mask for deeper fears perhaps, a fear of losing control, or of confronting the darkness within his own bloodline. Was Edward a man haunted by guilt, or was he the architect of the very madness that consumed his wives? The evidence is murky, tangled in layers of secrecy and denial. What is clear, however, is that his presence loomed over the Hartwell estate like a shadow one that grew darker with each passing year, suffocating the women who dared to love him. As we peel back the layers of Edward Hartwell's life, we begin to see a man trapped by his own demons, wielding power with a cold hand that crushed those closest to him. His story is not just one of personal tragedy, but a reflection of a society that prized control over compassion, appearances over truth. And in this crucible of repression and cruelty, the seeds of madness were sown seeds that would bloom into the grim legacy of the Hartwell wives. The Hartwell family's tragic legacy is etched most painfully in the lives of its 5 wives women whose stories, though separated by years, are bound together by a shared descent into madness. Each came from a different background, each with her own hopes and dreams, yet all were swallowed by the same dark fate. Their portraits, pieced together from fragile diary pages, whispered letters, and the hushed recollections of servants, reveal a haunting pattern. Individuality crushed beneath the weight of expectation, isolation, and something far more sinister lurking within the walls of the estate. Clara, the first wife, was the daughter of a modest but respectable merchant family. She was known for her gentle spirit and quiet resilience, a woman who found solace in the small joys of life gardening, reading, and the occasional visit to the village church. When Edward Hartwell courted her, Clara believed she had found security and love. Their marriage, however, quickly revealed the harsh realities of her new life. Letters from Clara's sister speak of a woman growing increasingly withdrawn, her once bright eyes dimming under Edward's strict control. A diary entry, penned in trembling script, hints at a growing fear. He watches me as if I am a fragile thing, to be protected or broken. I do not know which. Clara's decline was slow but relentless, culminating in a breakdown that saw her confined to a distant asylum, her fate sealed behind locked doors. Margaret, the second wife, was a stark contrast, fiery, outspoken, and fiercely independent. Born into a minor, aristocratic family, she was unaccustomed to being silenced. Her marriage to Edward began with grand promises and lavish celebrations, but the veneer of happiness soon cracked. Servants recalled heated arguments, whispered threats, and a growing tension that filled the estate's halls. Margaret's disappearance, one cold winter night, remains shrouded in mystery, but a surviving letter found in a hidden drawer suggests desperation. If I am to be lost, let it be on my own terms. Her fate, unlike Clara's, was never publicly acknowledged, swallowed instead by rumors and silence. Beatrice, the third wife, was delicate in both body and mind. A childhood marked by illness left her fragile, but she possessed a quiet grace that endeared her to many. Her marriage to Edward was arranged swiftly after Margaret's disappearance, a union more of convenience than affection. Beatrice's journals, discovered decades later, reveal a woman caught between hope and despair. I try to be strong, she wrote, but the walls close in and the shadows grow longer each day. Her mental state deteriorated rapidly, marked by episodes of confusion and withdrawal. The estate's physician noted signs of severe depression, but treatment was limited to rest and isolation, a common Victorian approach that often did more harm than good. Eleanor, the fourth wife, was perhaps the most complex of all. Educated and fiercely intelligent, she challenged Edward in ways none of the others dared. Their relationship was a volatile mix of admiration and conflict, with Eleanor refusing to be a silent partner. Her letters, smuggled out by a loyal maid, speak of a growing paranoia and a sense of being watched. "I fear the house itself conspires against me," she wrote. Eleanor's descent into madness was swift and terrifying, marked by vivid hallucinations and violent outbursts. Her final letter, found years later, is a desperate plea for escape. "The darkness is not just in my mind, it lives here, in every corner of this cursed place." The fifth and final wife, whose name remains lost to history, arrived under a cloud of secrecy. Little is known of her origins, but her brief time at the estate was marked by a rapid unraveling. Servants spoke of strange noises at night, of a woman who wandered the halls in a trance-like state, muttering to unseen figures. Her breakdown was the most public, culminating in the letter that opened this story, a chilling testament to the family's curse. Her fate sealed the Hartwell legacy, a grim reminder that the cycle of madness was far from broken. Despite their differences, the wives shared eerie similarities: isolation, fear, and a gradual loss of self. Each was trapped in a gilded cage, their voices silenced by the weight of expectation and the oppressive presence of Edward Hartwell. Their stories, fragmented and incomplete, form a mosaic of desperate, haunting portrait of women consumed by forces both internal and external. As we trace their lives, we are forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Were these women victims of a hereditary madness, a cruel twist of genetics passed down through the Hartwell bloodline? Or were they casualties of a darker, more deliberate force, one born of control, fear, and perhaps something supernatural? The answers remain elusive, buried beneath layers of time and silence. What is undeniable, however, is the profound tragedy of these 5 women. Their lives, once full of promise, were extinguished one by one, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. And as we delve deeper into their stories, we begin to see the true horror of the Hartwell estate, not just the madness that claimed them, but the forces that conspired to keep their stories hidden, their voices unheard. The first cracks in the Hartwell family's carefully constructed facade appeared not with a bang, but with whispers, soft, unsettling murmurs that drifted through the village like a cold wind slipping beneath the door. At first, these murmurs were dismissed as the idle gossip of small-town folk, the kind of stories that grow in the telling, fueled by superstition and fear. But as the years passed, the whispers hardened into something darker, more insistent, and the shadows that clung to the Hartwell estate began to stretch beyond its stone walls, infecting the very air of the surrounding countryside. It began with small, inexplicable incidents, things that might have been overlooked if they had not multiplied with such eerie precision. Servants spoke of strange noises echoing through the halls at night, soft footsteps pacing the corridors, the faint sound of weeping behind locked doors, and sometimes a chilling laughter that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. One maid, a young woman named Agnes, swore she saw fleeting figures in the corner of her eye shapes that vanished when she turned to look, leaving only a cold emptiness behind. Locals, already wary of the imposing Hartwell estate, began to weave these tales into a tapestry of dread. The village elders whispered of an old curse, a shadow cast long ago by a scorned ancestor whose name had been erased from the family records. They spoke of restless spirits, of a darkness that fed on sorrow and madness, growing stronger with each broken heart within the estate's walls. Children were warned to stay away from the Hartwell lands after dusk, and even the bravest men, hesitated before crossing the estate's iron gates. The first wife, Clara, was the first to show signs that something was terribly wrong. Letters from her family describe a woman who grew increasingly withdrawn, her laughter fading into silence, her eyes haunted by unseen terrors. One entry reads, "She speaks of shadows that move when no one is there, of voices calling her name. In the dead of night, we fear for her mind, but no one dares speak openly of what might befall her." The household physician, a man of science and reason, was baffled by her symptoms, unable to offer more than rest and isolation. Then came Margaret, the second wife, whose fiery spirit seemed to clash violently with the growing darkness. Neighbors reported heated arguments echoing from the estate, and servants whispered of a woman who defied the suffocating rules imposed by Edward Hartwell. But it was not just rebellion that marked her time at the estate, it was the strange occurrences that seemed to follow her like a shadow. Objects moved inexplicably, cold drafts swept through sealed rooms, and on more than one occasion, Margaret was found staring blankly into space, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. The villagers' unease reached a fever pitch when Margaret vanished one bitter winter night. No one saw her leave, and no trace was found, only a single, blood-stained glove lying in the snow near the edge of the estate's ancient woods. The local constable launched a discreet investigation, but the Hartwell name was untouchable, and the case was quietly closed. Rumors swirled. Some said she had fled to escape madness, others whispered of foul play, and a few dared to suggest something far more sinister. As the community grappled with fear and uncertainty, the estate itself seemed to grow colder, its shadows deeper. The disappearance of Margaret was not an end, but a beginning. Dark turning point that would unravel the fragile threads holding the Hartwell family together. The whispers grew louder, the shadows longer, and the question that haunted every whispered conversation remained unanswered. What truly happened to the second wife of Hartwell? And as the estate's gates closed behind the winter's chill, one thing was certain: no one would ever look at the Hartwell family the same way again. The descent into madness within the Hartwell estate was neither sudden nor isolated. It was a slow, suffocating spiral that gripped each wife in turn, dragging them deeper into a darkness that seemed to consume not only their minds, but their very souls. What began as subtle shifts in behavior soon became terrifying episodes of delusion, despair, and violence, as the fragile boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred beyond recognition. Clara's decline was the first to be documented, though even then it was shrouded in euphemism and denial. To Edward Hartwell, her growing silence and withdrawal were mere signs of nervous exhaustion, a condition he believed could be cured with rest and strict discipline. Yet Clara's journals, hidden away in a forgotten drawer, tell a different story, one of a woman haunted by shadows that whispered cruel secrets, of nights spent trembling beneath heavy quilts, listening to footsteps that never came. Her pleas for help were met with cold admonishments, her fears dismissed as hysteria. As her mind unraveled, so too did her place within the household. Until she was quietly removed, her absence explained away as a necessary retreat for health. Margaret's fate was even more harrowing. Unlike Clara, she fought fiercely against the invisible chains tightening around her. But the estate, with its oppressive walls and Edward's iron grip, was a prison from which there was no escape. Witnesses recall her frantic pacing through the halls, her voice rising in desperate cries that echoed through the night. Servants spoke of strange rituals she was rumored to perform in secret attempts to ward off the darkness that seemed to seep from the very stones of the house. Yet Edward's response was one of cold pragmatism. He forbade any mention of her fears, insisting that a strong woman must master her mind or be mastered by it. When Margaret vanished, the silence that followed was deafening, a void that swallowed questions and replaced them with dread. Beatrice's fragility made her particularly vulnerable to the estate's growing malevolence. Her journals reveal a woman caught between hope and despair, clinging to fleeting moments of clarity even as the shadows closed in. She described hearing voices, soft, coaxing whispers that promised escape but delivered only torment. Her isolation deepened as Edward's attempts to correct her condition grew harsher, ranging from enforced bed rest to confinement in locked rooms. The physician's treatments, limited by the era's rudimentary understanding of mental illness, only seemed to exacerbate her suffering. Beatrice's final entries speak of a creeping madness that wraps around the mind like a cold fog, a fog from which there was no awakening. Eleanor's story is perhaps the most chilling of all. Her intelligence and defiance made her a formidable presence, but also a target for Edward's wrath. As her mental state deteriorated, she became convinced that the house itself was alive, an entity that watched, judged, and punished. Her letters, smuggled out by a loyal maid, speak of a growing paranoia and a sense of being watched. "I fear the house itself conspires against me," she wrote. Eleanor's descent into madness was swift and terrifying, marked by vivid hallucinations and violent outbursts. Her final letter, found years later, is a desperate plea for escape. "The darkness is not just in my mind, it lives here, in every corner of this cursed place." The fifth and final wife, whose name remains lost to history, arrived under a cloud of secrecy. Little is known of her origins, but her brief time at the estate was marked by a rapid unraveling. Servants spoke of strange noises at night, of a woman who wandered the halls in a trance-like state, muttering to unseen figures. Her breakdown was the most public, culminating in a letter that opened this story, a chilling testament to the family's curse. Her fate sealed the Hartwell legacy, a grim reminder that the cycle of madness was far from broken. Despite their differences, the wives shared eerie similarities: isolation, fear, and a gradual loss of self. Each was trapped in a gilded cage, their voices silenced by the weight of expectation and the oppressive presence of Edward Hartwell. Their stories, fragmented and incomplete, form a mosaic of despair, a haunting portrait of women consumed by forces both internal and external. As we trace their lives, we are forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Were these women victims of a hereditary madness, a cruel twist of genetics passed down through the Hartwell bloodline? Or were they casualties of a darker, more deliberate force, one born of control, fear, and perhaps something supernatural? The answers remain elusive, buried beneath layers of time and silence. What is undeniable, however, is the profound tragedy of these 5 women. Their lives, once full of promise, were extinguished one by one, leaving behind only whispers and shadows, and as we delve deeper into their stories, we begin to see the true horror of the Hartwell estate. Not just the madness that claimed them, but the forces that conspired to keep their stories hidden, their voices unheard. The descent into madness within the Hartwell estate was neither sudden nor isolated, it was a slow, suffocating spiral that gripped each wife in turn, dragging them deeper into a darkness that seemed to consume not only their minds, but their very souls. What began as subtle shifts in behavior soon became terrifying episodes of delusion, despair, and violence, as the fragile boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred beyond recognition. Clara's decline was the first to be documented, though even then it was shrouded in euphemism and denial. To Edward Hartwell, her growing silence and withdrawal were mere signs of nervous exhaustion, a condition he believed could be cured with rest and strict discipline. Yet Clara's journals, hidden away in a forgotten drawer, tell a different story, one of a woman haunted by shadows that whispered cruel secrets, of nights spent trembling beneath heavy quilts, listening to footsteps that never came. Her pleas for help were met with cold admonishments, her fears dismissed as hysteria. As her mind unraveled, so too did her place within the household. Until she was quietly removed, her absence explained away as a necessary retreat for health. Margaret's fate was even more harrowing. Unlike Clara, she fought fiercely against the invisible chains tightening around her. But the estate, with its oppressive walls and Edward's iron grip, was a prison from which there was no escape. Witnesses recall her frantic pacing through the halls, her voice rising in desperate cries that echoed through the night. Servants spoke of strange rituals she was rumored to perform in secret attempts to ward off the darkness that seemed to seep from the very stones of the house. Yet Edward's response was one of cold pragmatism. He forbade any mention of her fears, insisting that a strong woman must master her mind or be mastered by it. When Margaret vanished, the silence that followed was deafening, a void that swallowed questions and replaced them with dread. Beatrice's fragility made her particularly vulnerable to the estate's growing malevolence. Her journals reveal a woman caught between hope and despair, clinging to fleeting moments of clarity even as the shadows closed in. She described hearing voices, soft, coaxing whispers that promised escape but delivered only torment. Her isolation deepened as Edward's attempts to correct her condition grew harsher, ranging from enforced bed rest to confinement in locked rooms. The physician's treatments, limited by the era's rudimentary understanding of mental illness, only seemed to exacerbate her suffering. Beatrice's final entries speak of a creeping madness that wraps around the mind like a cold fog, a fog from which there was no awakening. Eleanor's story is perhaps the most chilling of all. Her intelligence and defiance made her a formidable presence, but also a target for Edward's wrath. As her mental state deteriorated, she became convinced that the house itself was alive, an entity that watched, judged, and punished. Her letters, smuggled out by a loyal maid, speak of a growing paranoia and a sense of being watched. "I fear the house itself conspires against me," she wrote. Eleanor's descent into madness was swift and terrifying, marked by vivid hallucinations and violent outbursts. Her final letter, found years later, is a desperate plea for escape. "The darkness is not just in my mind, it lives here, in every corner of this cursed place." The fifth and final wife, whose name remains lost to history, arrived under a cloud of secrecy. Little is known of her origins, but her brief time at the estate was marked by a rapid unraveling. Servants spoke of strange noises at night, of a woman who wandered the halls in a trance-like state, muttering to unseen figures. Her breakdown was the most public, culminating in the letter that opened this story, a chilling testament to the family's curse. Her fate sealed the Hartwell legacy, a grim reminder that the cycle of madness was far from broken. Despite their differences, the wives shared eerie similarities: isolation, fear, and a gradual loss of self. Each was trapped in a gilded cage, their voices silenced by the weight of expectation and the oppressive presence of Edward Hartwell. Their stories, fragmented and incomplete, form a mosaic of despair, a haunting portrait of women consumed by forces both internal and external. As we trace their lives, we are forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Were these women victims of a hereditary madness, a cruel twist of genetics passed down through the Hartwell bloodline? Or were they casualties of a darker, more deliberate force, one born of control, fear, and perhaps something supernatural? The answers remain elusive, buried beneath layers of time and silence. What is undeniable, however, is the profound tragedy of these 5 women. Their lives, once full of promise, were extinguished one by one, leaving behind only whispers and shadows. And as we delve deeper into their stories, we begin to see the true horror of the Hartwell estate. Not just the madness that claimed them, but the forces that conspired to keep their stories hidden, their voices unheard. The arrival of Dr. Jonathan Merrick at the Hartwell estate marked a turning point in the long, shadowed history of the family's tragedy. A man of science and reason, Merrick was unlike anyone who had come before, Haman, outsider with no allegiance. to the rigid social codes or whispered superstitions that had long governed the estate's secrets. His reputation as a progressive physician, one who sought to understand the mind rather than simply confine it, preceded him. Yet even he could not have anticipated the depths of darkness he would uncover behind the estate's imposing stone walls. Merrick's initial visit was prompted by a letter from a distant relative of the Hartwells, a woman desperate for answers and unwilling to accept the official explanations of madness and misfortune. The letter spoke of strange occurrences, of a family haunted not only by mental illness but by something far more elusive and terrifying. Intrigued and compelled by his own scientific curiosity, Merrick accepted the invitation, determined to separate fact from folklore. From the moment he stepped onto the estate grounds, Merrick was struck by the palpable tension that hung in the air. The villagers regarded him with suspicion, their eyes clouded by fear and old rumors. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was suffocating heavy with the scent of decay and secrets long buried. Yet Merrick's approach was methodical. He sought evidence, not ghosts, and began his investigation with careful interviews and examinations. His first encounters with the remaining household staff revealed a fractured picture. Some spoke openly of the wives' strange behaviors, while others clung to silence, fearful of the patriarch's wrath or the estate's dark reputation. Merrick noted the contrast between the servants' whispered superstitions and his own clinical observations. Where they saw curses and spirits, he sought medical explanations, hereditary illness, trauma, and the crushing weight of Victorian societal expectations. But as Merrick delved deeper, the line between science and superstition began to blur. In the dusty library, hidden behind a false panel, he discovered a collection of journals and letters documents that had been deliberately concealed. These writings, penned by the wives themselves and by Edward Hartwell, revealed a disturbing pattern of control, fear, and despair. More chilling still were references to secret rooms within the estate, places where the wives had been confined, or where Edward conducted rituals to protect the family. Guided by these clues, Merrick explored the mansion's labyrinthine corridors, uncovering a hidden chamber beneath the east wing. The room was stark and cold, its walls lined with strange symbols and faded inscriptions. Among the relics was a worn, leather-bound book, its pages filled with cryptic notes and drawings that hinted at occult practices, an attempt to harness or ward off a malevolent force believed to haunt the family line. Merrick's scientific mind wrestled with the implications. Could these rituals have exacerbated the wives' conditions, or were they desperate acts born of fear and superstition? The evidence suggested a family caught between two worlds, one of reason and progress, and another of ancient fears and dark traditions. Edward Hartwell's denial of the supernatural may have been a mask, concealing his own belief in these forces and his attempts to control them. As Merrick pieced together the fragments of truth, he faced growing resistance. The estate's atmosphere seemed to close in around him, shadows lengthening and whispers rising in the night. The villagers' warnings echoed in his mind. Some secrets were meant to remain buried, some darkness too deep to confront. Yet Merrick pressed on, driven by a conviction that understanding the past was the only way to break the cycle of madness. His investigation culminated in a confrontation with Edward Hartwell himself, man whose charm and menace were two sides of the same coin. Their exchange was a battle of wills, science clashing with superstition, reason confronting fear. Edward's facade cracked, revealing a man tormented by guilt and desperation, trapped by the very legacy he sought to control. In the end, Merrick's discoveries painted a portrait of a family ensnared by forces both human and otherworldly. The truth was neither simple nor comforting. It was a tangled web of psychological torment, societal cruelty, and ancient dread. Darkness that had claimed 5 wives and threatened to consume all who dared to seek the light. As Merrick prepared to leave the estate, He carried with him not only the weight of the Hartwell tragedy, but a warning. Some mysteries resist explanation. Some shadows refuse to fade. And in the heart of the Hartwell estate, the line between madness and the supernatural remained forever blurred. Beneath the cold stone and creeping ivy of the Hartwell estate lay a secret so profound, so suffused with darkness, that it threatened to unravel everything the family had fought to conceal. Dr. Jonathan Merrick's relentless investigation had peeled back layers of silence and denial, but the final revelation was more harrowing than he or anyone could have imagined. It was a truth that blurred the boundaries between science and superstition, between human cruelty and something far more sinister. In the hidden chamber beneath the east wing, Merrick uncovered a collection of faded documents, letters, journals, and cryptic manuscripts that told a story stretching back generations. The Hartwell bloodline was marked by a hereditary affliction, a rare and devastating genetic illness that warped the mind and shattered the soul. But this was no ordinary disease. It was intertwined with the family's obsession with control, purity, and power, a poison passed down not only through blood, but through the very rituals and Hartwells from the outside world. But in doing so, they only deepened the shadow that consumed them. Merrick's heart pounded as he read the confessions of Edward himself, hidden among the papers. The man who had seemed so cold and unyielding was revealed as a tragic figure, tormented by guilt and fear. Edward's writings spoke of a desperate attempt to save his wives, to wrest control from the darkness that threatened to destroy them. But his methods, strict control, isolation, and the invocation of ancient rites had only accelerated their decline. The wives were not merely victims of madness or cruelty. They were prisoners of a legacy that demanded sacrifice. Each had been drawn into the family's web, their identities eroded by the relentless pressure to conform, to hide, to endure. The estate itself was a crucible of despair, its very walls soaked with sorrow and fear. Yet, amid this horror, Merrick found a flicker of something else, a question that cut to the heart of the tragedy. Was the Hartwell family doomed by fate, bound by an unbreakable curse, or had their downfall been shaped by choices made in fear and ignorance? The line between destiny and free will blurred, challenging the very notion of what it meant to be trapped by one's blood and history. The revelation forced Merrick and Ustcon comfortable truths about the nature of madness, the weight of family secrets, and the human capacity for both cruelty and compassion. It was a story not just of horror, but of the fragile, desperate struggle to find light in the deepest darkness. As the shadows of the Hartwell estate closed in once more, the legacy of 5 wives lost to madness stood as a haunting reminder. Some curses are born not of magic, but of fear, silence, and the choices we make to protect or destroy the ones we love. The Hartwell estate, once a symbol of wealth and prestige, had become a monument to tragedy, a place where the echoes of madness lingered long after the last wife's final breakdown. The surviving family members were left to grapple with the heavy burden of a legacy stained by sorrow and silence. Edward Hartwell himself, stripped of his public facade, retreated into isolation, a broken man haunted by the ghosts of those he had lost and the choices he had made. His once commanding presence faded into shadow, a cautionary figure consumed by regret and despair. The estate, too, bore the scars of its dark history. Rooms once filled with laughter and light now stood empty, their walls whispering secrets. To the wind, servants who remained spoke in hushed tones of strange noises and fleeting apparitions, remnants of the torment that had unfolded within. The village, once proud of its connection to the Hartwells, grew wary and distant, the family name becoming a whispered warning rather than a mark of honor. Psychologically, the impact was profound. The cycle of madness had left deep wounds, only in those directly afflicted, but in the community that had witnessed the unraveling. The stigma surrounding mental illness, already suffocating in Victorian society, was intensified by the Hartwell tragedy reinforcing fears and misunderstandings that would persist for generations. Families like the Hartwells became cautionary tales, their stories twisted into myths that obscured the human suffering beneath. Yet beneath the horror and despair, there remained a fragile thread of empathy. The wives, once silenced and forgotten, began to emerge from the shadows through the fragments of their diaries and letters. Their voices, though broken, spoke of resilience, hope, and the desperate yearning for freedom from the invisible chains that bound them. It was a reminder that behind every tale of madness lies a human story of love, loss, and the struggle to be seen and understood. But the most chilling truth was that the cycle was far from over. The estate passed into the hands of distant relatives, and whispers persisted of new shadows gathering, of a darkness that refused to be banished. The legacy of the Hartwell wives served as a grim warning, without reckoning and understanding. The past's horrors have a way of seeping into the present, threatening to claim new victims. In the end, the aftermath of the Hartwell tragedy is a haunting reflection on the fragility of the human mind, the destructive power of secrecy, and the urgent need to confront the shadows that dwell within families and societies alike. It is a story that lingers an echo of insanity that refuses to fade. As we stand at the edge of the Hartwell family's dark history, we are left with questions that reach far beyond the walls of that cursed estate. What truly drives madness? Are we shaped by the invisible chains of our genetics, or by the weight of trauma passed down through generations? Can the horrors inflicted by one person ripple through time, binding others in a cycle they cannot escape? And what if evil itself is? It an external force, a curse whispered in shadows, or something far more human, born from fear, control, and silence? The story of the Hartwell wives challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about fate and free will, about the line between victim and perpetrator. It forces us to ask, when does suffering become a legacy, and how do we break free from it? In a world still grappling with the stigma of mental illness, their tale is a stark reminder of the cost of misunderstanding and neglect. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you believe lies at the heart of the Hartwell tragedy? Was it a hereditary curse, a product of Victorian repression, or something darker still? Have you encountered stories or experiences that echo this haunting pattern? Share your thoughts, theories, and reflections in the comments below. Let's explore these mysteries together. If you found this story compelling, consider subscribing and joining our community, where we delve into the shadows of history and the human psyche. Because sometimes, the darkest stories reveal the most profound truths. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the haunting legacy of the Hartwell family, a story of love, madness, and secrets buried deep within the walls of a once grand estate. If this tale stirred your curiosity and sent a chill down your spine, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you won't miss our next exploration into the dark corners of history. Coming soon, we'll uncover another chilling mystery, one that delves into a forgotten asylum where whispers of cruelty and despair still echo through the halls. It's a story that, like the Hartwells, challenges everything we think we know about the human mind and the shadows it can cast. Before you go, we want to hear from you. What do you think still lies hidden in the Hartwell estate? Are there truths waiting to be uncovered, or is some darkness best left undisturbed? Share your theories and fears in the comments below. You dare, because some secrets still lurk in the shadows of the Hartwell estate. Only time will tell.